Hello, my name is Dominic Underhallhouse and welcome to another episode of Moonbreaker. In today's episode, with the patch just around the corner, what I've decided to do is look at what some of the changes that I'd like to see come to the game would be. So, obviously we know some of the changes coming up in the patch. That's going to include things like potentially objective-based play and that sort of thing. We know quite a few of the bug fixes, so fingers crossed for those, and they're going to fix some of the things that, are causing a few difficulties, especially looking at you, medical recall. But other than that, here's a list of things that I'd love to see in the game. People in the Discord have said that they'd like to see in the game as well, and also I've had a look at the null and put in a few suggestions from there as well. So I've combined all of it together, and while we might not necessarily agree on how to implement it, a lot of these things are things that a lot of the community would love to see, and some of them are things that I'd like to see just personally. We'll have a look through it and see what we can work out. So the first things to look at is one of the most obvious ones that everybody I think is going to agree on, is that we all can't wait for more captains and more crew. So with the game as it is at the moment, we've got a decent sized number of units, but with 25 more crew due in, I think it's January now, we'll be having so much more, so many more options, so much more variety, and it really is going to change the meta. So with the changes that are the last couple of patches, they've actually been quite drastic, so the meta's changed a fair amount each time. However, it looks like, we could do with another shake-up. We're seeing a lot of aggro lists at the moment. Maximus is still ubiquitous. I've not really seen any successful lists without running him. So finding ways of giving us other options, either other good one drops, different meta choices, that sort of thing, I think something that we're all really looking forward to. And even if not, there's just going to be some cool things. Another captain gives every unit in the current roster a new lease of life. We've got to find new ways of finding out if they're useful, what synergies there are, how we can make a new sort of roster out of anything there. It's a fascinating time of year, is any game that you're into when there's new things being released. So much you can look forward to, so much you can experiment with, and honestly I think we all just want more toys to play with. Who doesn't? It's coming up to Christmas, more toys is always a good sign. So that's the first and most obvious of all the things that I think everyone wants, is more captains and more crew. The next up is going to be assists. So this is going in twofold. So in general, I'm not going to talk too much about sort of balance tweaks to things, because there's a lot of balance tweaks that potentially could be made, everything down from units to assists and that sort of thing. But the first thing I will say on the assists, just quickly on that front, is that personally, and I think along with a lot of other people as well, I believe that a lot of the assists need to be toned down. Again, we've had a lot of discussions in the Discord with a couple of people who've got very strong opinions on this that are different to mine, but even then we all agree that the assists need to be toned down. And the two main offenders, funnily enough, don't appear on this image we've got here, but they are Vortex and Disruptor. They are absolutely the most powerful assists by a long shot. In a game that really rewards good positioning, something that affects your opponent's positioning is going to be more powerful than even just raw stat effects a lot of the time. So that's absolutely something that I want to see changed, is sort of the power level of the assists. Generally sort of slightly down across the board would be a good thing. My go-to suggestion for Vortex and Disruptor is probably a 4-turn cooldown, and shrink the size down to something like the same as Corrosive, or maybe even things like Peacemaker Ballum. Have them be more like a little nudge than a full-on shove. But again, I trust the devs in their choice of options for that, but it's definitely something that I think needs to be toned down a little bit. One of the other things with assists is we want new assists. So there's so much variety here. We've had discussion about things like potentially a piece of temporary terrain that you could place down, which could be really cool. I like the idea of like a laser grid, so it's just a line across the map, and if an opponent walks across that in their next turn in any way, shape or form, they take some damage for it. So similar to how Orbital Strike would work, but it's an immediate effect rather than the next turn. So if a unit crosses it more than once, say a Maximus runs there, runs back, would take the damage twice. I think that would be a really cool idea for an assist. So in general, I think assists provide a lot of design space. They're one of my favourite parts of the game for keeping things interesting, because you never know what you're going to get paired with. But also I think a little bit of rebalancing, along with new assists, so much more interest to be had on that front. So really keen to see where assists go from here. Also maybe even just an in-game area to look at the assists and what they do, because at the moment there's no sort of in-game option to see what the different assists can do. So would love that to be an option of just sort of almost like a data section, so you can check those out, maybe parallel with the tutorial. The next thing I want to look at is rewards. So there's a lot to be said about rewards. At the moment, these are the two main forms of rewards that we've got. We've got the season track, which has a lot of different things on there. It's great. It's a really, really great thing. There's so many different, like sparks. So you can see in here, sparks, decals, banners, like banner crests. Later on, you've got the glowing paints. You've got paint jobs. You've got loads of different things like that. So that's a really good sense of reward, and also sparks as well. So the thing with sparks and with the rewards in general, at the moment, the sparks only upgrade unit rarity, and with that only affecting the spawn and death animations, I think it just needs a little bit more use in there. So finding sort of additional use on the rewards would be brilliant, and for me that also goes in parallel with the leveling up system for the characters. So at the moment we get level 3, you get access to their profile picture, and at level 10 you get access to the banner crest. So it feels like there should be some sort of reward at each stage along the way. We have got the title for the unit, sort of what level of experience they've got, but maybe even a different way of showing it would be nice. So having that show up on your character more than just sort of the little icon, and make it a little bit more obvious. Maybe a visual thing. One of the things that I quite like the idea of is having the option of a more decorative base based on whether or not your character is a higher level or not. So I think the reward system, there's obviously going to be a lot more to come. There's going to be a lot more sort of interesting things in the future, but that's something that I'm really keen to see, sort of how it's going to change, what we can sort of see in the future, and how we can just get that little bit of that reward feedback loop into things. Because at the moment, sparks don't feel like they do that much, but this is sort of a very early stage in the game. We're in the early access, not everything's going to be implemented yet, and given that the whole economy was reworked just a couple of months ago, it's going to take a bit of time for these things to sort of find a new settling point, so that then the devs can then implement what I assume is already planned features for rewards in the future. There are so many things that could be done with this game, so many cosmetic features, that sort of thing. I can't wait to see what happens, but I really think there's some great scope for opportunity in the reward section, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes in the future. The next up, we've got Cargo Run. So there's quite a few things that I'd like to see change with Cargo Run. First of all, it's like one of my favourite things about the game. It's a really fun game mode. It's really sort of interesting, gives you a lot of different options. It's actually quite good for learning the game as well, especially now that there's no entry cost whatsoever. So it's a really fun game mode, but I think there's a few things that could make it just that little bit more interesting. First of all, is having a cap on the number of relics, I think is absolutely fine, but it gets to a point where sometimes things like other games similar to this sort of effect, like Slay the Spire, there's no cap on the number of relics you can get. So having a few more options there and having the ability to have more than 3, I think would create some absolutely wacky combos, and it would be incredibly powerful, but it would be a really, really fun thing to do. It might just be that there are some maybe that interact negatively when you've got a few too many at once, but I'm sure that's something that you'd be able to look into. And I think the other side of things is if you put that into place, that obviously increases the power level of the units that you're going to be playing with. So I think at that point we also need to adjust the cargo run accordingly. So while the cargo run is fairly significant challenge for a lot of new players, as it stands now, I don't really struggle at all with the cargo run. There's no part of it that really feels like, most of the time I will get a 5-win run. Occasionally I'll drop down to 4. It doesn't feel particularly challenging most of the time. Like, I recently did a series of videos or played some on stream, and I got 5 wins in every single one that I tried. So having that little bit of extra challenge would be really interesting. And I think even in sort of a few extra ways, so even things like not just limiting it to 5. So if you think about, again, going back to Slay the Spire, there's a lot more levels involved in it. So obviously it goes on a lot long. Each game of Moonbreaker is a lot longer, but having the option to travel to more moons, experience more and more ramping up of the bosses, getting some things to the point where it's absolutely, brutal to play against, that is really, really appealing to me. Maybe having a second difficulty option would be something that I'd absolutely love to see. And I think, making it a real challenge, no matter how experienced you are, is something that would be, I think, a great addition to it, but still leaving the standard game mode as it is for those who want to still go down that route. Another thing mentioned quite a few times, and I think is probably going to come to the game at some point, is using your own paint jobs in Cargo Run. There's quite a few people that I've seen that really enjoy painting. They're not as big fan of PvP style gaming, so as it stands at the moment, they only get to see their own paint jobs when they're playing versus AI games, and so I'd love it if you could bring your own paint jobs to the Cargo Run. Obviously, it is a little awkward with units coming down that you don't use that often, but it's not like you don't own them anymore, like was the initial concern. So I really do think that having paint jobs included in the Cargo Run would be a great option. A couple of the other things is, one of them is having a visual reward for completing it. So I'm not talking about in terms of actual rewards, because at the moment the Season Pass XP is a really good reward. I'm sure there's going to be something else coming in the future. Previously it was blanks, now those have been replaced with sparks, but we don't get those as a Cargo Run reward anymore. So I'm sure something will be coming in the future, but what I'd like to see is a little victory screen. So one thing I love statistics, we'll get to that in a little bit of a moment, but even just a thing like showing which boxes you picked up, showing which crew you had live and die, which rounds they died in, what buffs they managed to pick up, or even just a little splash screen of your remaining crew at the end of it. Something just saying congratulations for completing your Cargo Run with a little sort of sparkly celebration, some fireworks. I think that would be a really, really brilliant addition, because at the moment you finish a Cargo Run and it just takes you back to the menu ready to start again. So that sort of visual gratification I think would be such a great upgrade as well. We already know there's going to be more relics and bosses coming in the future, and I'm looking forward to seeing that. What I would also love to see, which I don't know if they'll do, but I wouldn't mind seeing it, is seeing new units be implemented in the Cargo Run, say, a week or two before they're actually released. So that would be a really good way of getting people's hype up a little bit, is to see the enemy using the units that we get to use in a few weeks' time, and using that as a bit of like an intro event. So people will be spamming Cargo Runs to see these new crews, see what will be coming our way, and I'd love to see that as well. Next up, we are going into the stats. So there's a lot of things that I want to see in statistics. So some of them are fairly straightforward, some of them are a little bit more obscure. The first thing I will start on is the stats tab of each individual character. So from what we understand, these stats are going to be things you can see. We don't know what stats they're actually going to be, but they are already being recorded, and when they come to getting implemented, they should already be something we can see. Now what I'm hoping is this includes things like total damage dealt by a unit, number of models killed, amount of healing done, times ability used, like things that are your normal statistics and that sort of thing, but maybe even your win ratio when using a unit, or what turn you play out on average, and that sort of thing. Some things that you might not think would be there, but could be useful for seeing, strategic options and how different players use different things. But also it could even just be some like fun things as well. So there's so many options to that. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see win ratios per model for each individual player. I think that could obviously be something problematic while there's still balance concerns, but for instance, things like a Maximus, it's going to look like it's a high win rate, but the issue is it might not look high because everyone's playing it, so it might end up being a 50-50 win rate on Maximus, because Maximus is in 50%, in 100% of lists anyway. So, bringing in stats at the right point is important, but I cannot wait to get a stat screen for each individual model and see how well you've used them in the past as well. What I would also like to see is a stats page just in general, so you can have a look at your average win rate, you can maybe look at it over a certain period, over each season, that sort of thing. Your win rate with each captain would obviously come under those same stats as well, but also just interesting things like how much cinder you spend on abilities versus on your deploying crew and that sort of thing, your most picked assists, your win ratios of different assists, that sort of thing. There's so many interesting statistics that you can have like an in-depth look at. I would love to have all of those available. I would love to be able to sort of look at every bit of analytical data you could find and just really make good use out of that information. So the more stats the better. Even post game I would love to see some stats. So I'd love to see how many models killed, how much damage you took, how much damage you dealt, that sort of thing. And I'd really love to see as many statistics as you can implemented, but for people who don't like stats, having them in somewhere that's not just right in your face, absolutely perfect. really looking forward to things like statistics being implemented, so I can be the little nerd that I am and sit there going through numbers and having great fun working things out. Next up, we've got quality of life changes. So this is a lot of different things. Some of these are mine, some of these are from other people, some of these are from Nolt, and I think all of these are a little bit more debatable. Some people might want these, some people might not, but I think these would be nice changes that would just sort of make your things a little bit more comfortable playing. So the first of which is the turn timer. Personally, I think about a 10-second increase could be reasonable. I'm quite a sort of together player. I feel like I've got my head in it. I know what my game plan is most of the time, but occasionally I need a little bit longer to plan out a turn. For instance, today I actually missed lethal on the turn because it took me a little bit too long to put things together as to how I could do the maths to get the opponent down to 0, and I ran out of time to deploy my Scattervine and get in for 1 point of damage when my opponent was on 1 health. So a little bit of leeway in that. Maybe something like the Magic the Gathering Arena system, where you can bank up a few sort of extensions to your turn timer and then use those up as and when you need them. I think would be a great addition to the game as well. So the turn timer I don't think is normally an issue, but having an option to sort of increase it occasionally as and when you need it would be a really nice inclusion there. Editing roster from the select screen. So when you're going to pick your list for a round of PvP or versus AI, you can't change your roster from that screen. I think it would be great to be able to just make your edits there, pop into it, because you can go in and paint, but you can't go in and edit the roster. So just adding that functionality, meaning you don't have to go all the way out back into the roster screen to edit it, all the way out back into the PvP screen to start again, I think allows you to sort of tweak your list in between matches, especially if you're coming against, a lot of specific units in that queue, if the meta's shift in that direction. So editing the roster from the select screen, I think would be a great quality of life change as well. Next, toggling line of sight indicators for all units. So at the moment it toggles it between range units, so if you're playing a range unit it shows you what your range unit can see, or if you're playing a melee unit it shows you which range units can see you. This brings up issues with things like crankbait. So crankbait needs line of sight for their ability, but it doesn't necessarily show the line of sight indicators when you're moving the model. So it would be good to have just a keybind or something like that you can just press, see line of sight indicators for all units as you're moving the model, and give you that little bit more sort of control over where you're going to place your models and a little bit more knowledge as to what the correct thing is. Next is no automatic minimizing. So since the last big patch, the game has started minimizing every time you click off of it onto a different window. So I've noticed that some of the sponsored streamers have mentioned this. It's something that I've had an issue with as well. It causes a few sort of minor headaches when recording and things like that, but all in all it's something that should be an easy fix, like a full screen borderless windowed version, something like that would be a great option. It did exist previously, it didn't work this way in the past, so whatever's changed, have the option of changing that back, but also give people the option, have that option of choosing whether they want it whichever way they want. So love that to be the option as well. Background audio being toggleable. So at the moment, again, when you click off the window, the audio stops. I would love to be able to choose to keep that going for a couple of different reasons. One, because it just keeps things a bit more sort of continuous when I'm doing sort of videos and streams and that sort of thing. I can tab out to something else, check it, and if both of these changes happened, the stream would still have the same quality, the video would still have the same image, and the audio would be consistent throughout as well. But my actual main reason for it is because I love the soundtrack. I want to be able to put on the painting soundtrack and get on with other things. Because if I have got something else I need to be doing, the painting soundtrack is fantastic. I'd love to be able to listen to that while doing other jobs and that sort of thing. So having that as an option would be brilliant for me. The next is corrosive. So corrosive, currently, when you hover over a unit, it doesn't show you the damage that corrosive would do, it just shows you the unit's base damage, and you have to add corrosive yourself. Other effects, like Amplify Vital, are taken into account, but corrosive isn't. So given that the corrosive is always going to be that additional damage, it's worth adding that into the sort of the preview, just to make it a little bit clearer how much damage you're going to deal. I've seen a couple of streamers mention this, I've thought it myself. It just makes things a little bit cleaner. Auto sorting roster by cost, etc. So when you build a roster, there is no way to sort it by cost. It doesn't come up in cost order or anything like that. You may want it in alphabetical order. You may want to lay it out as if that's what turn you're going to put things in. It's a quite unwieldy thing. It doesn't even go in a straight line from left to right on the on the drop down list when it comes up. So having the option to rearrange that however you'd like, or even just an auto sort by cost, I think would be a great quality of life change. It gives you an easier way of sort of assessing your curve and that sort of thing. Another thing people have asked for in the note was a visual representation of what your curve was, your cinder curve. So you can see how many 1 drops, 2 drops, 3 drops. Much more impactful in games like card-based games like Magic the Gathering and that sort of thing, but still very useful to see in something like this to get an understanding of where your focus is. Are you playing more early drops? Are you playing more late drops? The next one we've got is to show your roster banner at the end screen. So having a banner, there's quite a lot of different options for banners. It's something that's nice to be able to personalize, and it would be great if that could just show up in the game at some point. So there's a couple of different ways in which we could do this. The first of which I like is just when you defeat the enemy captain, is just having a little animation where your banner plunges from the heavens and stabs into the ground over just where they used to be. I think that's a really nice way of showing your banner, showing off your victory, and having a good use for that as well. And the next one is going to combine with another point, which is showing your rosters in the end screen. So at the moment, only having victory or defeat, it's fine, it does the job, but I'd love to be able to see at the end screen, again, some statistics like I mentioned earlier, but also what crew your enemy was running, and your opponent was running, what crew you were running, and also say the banners and things they've got there, the ability to have a look at their paint schemes, even after the game's ended, would be brilliant. So just a little bit more of an informative end screen for each game. Would absolutely love to see that. The next one is an event log in game. So this would be again toggleable. Not everyone's going to want this, but this could show what each player did on each of their turns. You see this in a lot of games. Sometimes on the left hand side in the little box, it will tell you this person did this person did that, and I think that just gives you that little bit more information. And even though the hit rolls I don't believe are currently, I don't know how they're coded, I'm not a coder, I don't understand these things, but say if we're looking at a percentage, if it's a 98% chance, show us what we rolled from 0 to 100, or 1 to 100. And if we hit that 99 and that was the miss, whatever it was, absolutely fine. People just sometimes find it a little bit more psychologically, people don't feel like the computer's against them if you can see what the actual roll was. So I think that'll be an option, as well as showing what abilities were used, where your cinder went, that sort of thing. The next one we've got is allowing emotes from the end screen. So this isn't specifically at the end screen itself, but just to give us a few seconds after after our captain has died, so that we can then just emote and have a GG emote, a well played, something like that. Because at the moment, if the game ends, you don't get a chance to actually say anything to your opponent, and I like to be able to say, as and when I remember it, good game, or well played, or I enjoyed that, something along those lines. So that little bit of a delay there could be nice, but on the other side of things, sometimes there is a lot of delay and nothing we can do about it until while the sort of victory or defeat screen is up, and that doesn't really accomplish anything. So switching that time to somewhere where you can emote would be quite nice to be able to do. Next, so this is one I actually saw with sort of a Nolt post, I think it was, and being able to like your opponent's paint jobs. But on top of that, I love the idea of having a little counter as one of the statistics that you can see. So, how many likes have you got on your paint job? And I think for some players that really enjoy their painting, spend a lot of time on it, that would be such a nice little morale boost to see people liking their paint scheme. Obviously, not being able to like the same paint scheme more than once would make sense, so you don't just get people liking the same thing over and over again, but I think that would be a really nice bit of feedback for players that really enjoy the painting side of things. And also music selection while painting. So there's a lot of great music in the game, and I think just being able to switch between a few of them would be a really nice touch. It's not a huge ask, I just think it would be quite an interesting one for people who do have a preference. Next, we've got match history. So this is sort of a standard across sort of PvP based games a lot of the time. I'd love to be able to look back and just see some stats, the same end screen stats as to what I asked for earlier, but see that in a match history section and see your whether you've won the last few games, what you were playing, what you're playing against, that sort of thing. I think that would be another great quality of life addition as well. A play again button, nice and straightforward. When you're playing PvP, it currently takes you back to the menu again. It would be nice just to be able to finish up, go back in the game and just hit play again, queue you up again without having to go through the same selection process. A friends list with chat. So being able to have a little chat function in game, I think really helps build that, community feeling, that sort of thing. It helps it make it easier to challenge other players if you want to. So I would absolutely love to see a friends list with chat function included as well. And lastly, an improved new player experience. So I watch a lot of the sponsored streams. I want to try and be as supportive of the game as possible, and I quite often see people asking a lot of questions. So I think an improved sort of onboarding experience for new players would be so key. Even like I said earlier, like a glossary or sort of an information sheet saying what the assists do, what different things do, how different things function. I think that would be really useful. So finding just additional ways to make the new player experience better. For instance, cargo run isn't really explained at all. The first time I played it, I didn't know how to pick up the crates, and back then they still had health bars, so I was trying to shoot them, I was trying to use abilities on them, I was trying to do everything I could apart from move on to them. So finding things like that, we're going to forget these as experienced players, but we need to sort of remember that the new player experience does probably need a little bit of polishing just to keep people understanding the game as much as I do now. And I feel great about it. I think I understand most things in fairly reasonable depth, and I'd love for other players to just have that feeling they can hit the ground running almost. So these are some of the changes that I think would be great to come to Moonbreaker. I think the game is still fantastic. I'm so happy with it. I'm really looking forward to all of the changes that are coming our way. Hopefully you are too. And what I want to know is if you've got any other changes you'd make as well. So I've specifically avoided talking about a ranked play mode. I know that's something a lot of people want. I really want it as well, but as was a few discussions in the Discord recently, I absolutely agree that we just need more time. A ranked game mode at the moment would split the player base, make it even harder for people to get games at a sort of an even level, because you don't know whether people are going to be queuing in one queue or the other. So I think we need to hold off on that until the game has got a few more things implemented. But anything that you think, please let me know, and I'd love to hear it. So if you've enjoyed this video, if you want to see more similar things, make sure you hit the subscribe button. It really is the best way to support me. I absolutely do just love seeing those notifications. I check it every single day to see if I've got any more. Other than that, hit the like button, make sure you comment, and most importantly, have a good day.